Hello, everybody. People have been asking me to do videos, history, government, politics videos. But I hadn't done anything lately because I hadn't really thought of anything. Why is somebody sending me a text message now? Okay, I'm gonna put this on silent because that's what happens if I'm awake and I have nothing to do. No one will text me or call me. If I decide to go to sleep early, here come the calls, here come the texts. If I try to do a live video, here come the call and text. You know the routine. All right, anyway, got that on silent. Um, Silent. So I did start thinking about something the other day, though, the other month, actually, about a month. And this is Ejecto Cito Cuzzo. This is a 10% flavored stout, by the way, Imperial Stout from Fort Worth, Texas, Martin Brewing Company. Already threw away the can. Expensive flavored beer. I started thinking, I was thinking, and I was saying to myself, I said, I might do a video about this theory I have that countries bait other countries into attacking because they figure they got them where they want them, but they need to make it look like they started it. And then they can rally their people and say, look, we were attacked. They fired the first shot. We have to stand up to them and blah, 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 and then people will be all gung-ho for it. So I was thinking about that, and I was going to make a video. I said, I might make a video and then go through the scenarios and then see what people think about it, because you can make comments here, and then maybe some people want to join live. Some of the people I hang out with, they might want to join live. I don't know if they would, but and Wayne Allen had been doing these afternoon beer videos for a while, but he more or less stopped. So I usually would join him in the last few months because they had interesting videos, but that kind of come to a halt or a hiatus, let's say, maybe forever, but maybe not. But anyway, so we could think about some things that are sort of obvious, like let's say 1861, the attack on Fort Sumter. Now that's kind of obvious. Lincoln wanted to bait the South into attacking so that he could go parade that around that they had started the war. That convinced some people. It didn't convince anybody in the South, and it didn't convince a lot of people in the North either. A lot of people in the Democratic Party accused him of doing that, being a warmonger, starting a conflict, making all kind of trouble, and they were very hostile to him. But so we know that we know about that scenario where South Carolina had told the United States they need to remove the people from the fort, and then he was trying to provoke them. But then you could say, well, they were kind of foolish for just taking the bait, because that's what he wanted them to do. Then you could smash them and make them rejoin the Union. A union is voluntary, okay? If you join a country club, you're in union with them. You joined, and if you decide you don't want to be in the union anymore, you can quit. The country club. An empire is forced, so you could argue that it's not really a union if you make people join it. It's like somebody saying, my wife never left me. I told her I'd kill her if she tried. It's not a true, a happy union. It's like your own little personal empire. So that's sort of like the situation there. He wanted them to attack because he had a pretty good idea that they could win, although it was much harder than he had thought. Much harder, and he came close to losing. But he felt, okay, 600,000 people got killed in this project of mine to restore the Union with force so that they would have to be part of it. But that's a small price to pay. I guess that's his thinking. Okay, a few 100,000 people died, 600,000, not counting civilians, I might add. There's more like 1 million people. Um, so that we could have Old Glory flying over all these states. And then, of course, they reframed it as doing it for some other reasons, more humanistic reasons, which wasn't the case, but that's how they, if you watch television today, that's how it's presented. Oh, it's done for this honorable reason. It had to be done, even though that probably would have happened anyway, just a few years down the road, that kind of thing. So that one we know about. Um, we know about the Maine, USS Maine blowing up in Havana Harbor. That's a murky situation. So maybe the U.S. was trying to bait Spain into attacking. They definitely did not want to go to war, of course, because they knew they were weak and they would lose. That's why they were being provoked, because the U.S. figured they had land that they wanted. Land such as Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippine Islands, Guam. So that was a controversial war at that time, too. But they weren't just going to hand over parts of their country, because Spain considered Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam part of Cuba, really, not just like some colonies. They had been part of Spain since, well, the 1490s, in some cases, 1500s. So, but the Maine exploding was a convenient thing, and for the pro-war crowd, and they never could figure out if it was obvious that Spain didn't do it, because that would totally defy logic. Since they're trying to avoid a war, the worst thing they could do is blow up a U.S. battleship. It could have been Spanish rebels, you know what I mean, Cuban rebels trying to provoke something. Could have been U.S. doing it, or it could have just been like the current theory seems to be that it just was a faulty engine and it blew up, which was convenient nonetheless. So I'm not going to say that's an example of bait, because that's an unclear situation. Let's see. I'm not going to go into the Mexican War, because that's murky also. That's a little funny, kind of funny stuff there too. But I mean, obviously President Polk was not too upset that the Mexicans had, fired a few shots across the river, some little skirmish. Then they could frame it like, oh, American blood has been shed on American soil, and Americans would be all hot to attack. Ironic about that, the irony about that is that Lincoln was an anti-war congressman at that time, saying, look what this man's doing, leading us into war and so forth. But that was when he wasn't in power. You haven't noticed a lot of these anti-war people, once they become president, they suddenly not anti-war. But not to mention the current president. But anyway, but let's look at some things people may not have thought about. I was thinking about the First World War, World War I, right? So I'm thinking about that. I cannot say that Great Britain, the United Kingdom, I cannot say the United Kingdom baited Germany into going to war. There's no evidence of that. All right, I'm standing up because I got tired of sitting. There's no evidence of that, okay? So if you say, oh yeah, I know, I watched the video, okay, that's good. So we can't say that. But we can look at the situation and we can see how they use that as a convenient series of events to accomplish a goal that they had in mind for a long time, right? So we have the United Kingdom, called Great Britain, right, originally. Then they added Ireland as a part of it. So then it was the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, now Northern Ireland only, as the other part of Ireland defected and left the Commonwealth in 1949. But after 1688, we know that England more or less had this idea that they had solved their internal problems, more or less, their constitutional problems, by making a truce. So you could look at it that way, between the crown and the parliament. Because they had some bad things happening up until 1688. But then they made like a truce, So which continues till today. Now they decided, let's run the whole world, So not to say that they had paperwork saying they had a conference and sat down and said, well, let's run the whole world. Well, that's just basically what they did. So they start to do a series of targeting. We can look at that. So the first country they targeted was their across the channel neighbor, France. They had a long they had a long problem with them, because France kind of seemed to have the same viewpoint. They're going to run the show. And England said, no, we running the show. So they start fighting. They had been fighting off and on before, but some real showdowns for about 115 years. All throughout the 1700s, fighting over colonies out there in America and India, fighting over power in Europe, a series of wars, War of the Spanish Succession, War of the Austrian Succession, the 7 Years' War, then the climax, the War of the French Revolution, and then Napoleon, as it morphed into the Napoleonic War, in which they were able to finally defeat France. After Waterloo in 1815, France started to become a second-tier power, and in some ways, increasingly an appendage of the British Empire, or if you want to call them a tag-along. They wouldn't like to hear that, but it is the truth. So from their fierce rival, who really, if you look at their track record, it really wasn't that good. France always lost. It just took a long time to finally defeat them. But they had all these colonial wars and they always lost. They were like Remo, a degenerate gambler who always lost. And they always lost. They kept gambling and they kept losing. But then, so they became a tag-along to the British Empire. And so Napoleon was defeated, but they began to target a second country because they got very nervous at 1815 or around that time. It might have not been that exact year, but it was in that period that the Russian Empire, the Tsar, said, how about this? We got all these revolutionaries and liberals running around Europe, causing all kind of trouble. We're going to set up what we call the Holy League, the Holy Alliance. We're going to have all the Christian countries of Europe team up, and we're going to work against all these revolutionaries, and we're going to take them out no matter how we got to do it. So if any uprising occurs, we're going to all send in troops and wipe them out, and any people we capture involved in conspiratorial activity, well, you ain't going to be seeing them no more. That's basically the attitude. So Spain, they would say, yes, that's a good idea. The French Bourbons, who were restored to power in 1815, say, yes, that's a good idea because we know all about that. And Austria, the Habsburgs, say, yes, that's a good idea. But the British didn't like that idea. They took that as an implied threat. They took that as a threat. They took it as a challenge. They took it as, well, frankly, an emergency. Their attitude toward that was very negative. They're thinking, oh, we see how it's going to work. Russia's trying to run the show. They're going to be the preeminent power. They're going to set the policy for this planet, the world. We don't think so. We stir this drink. We run this show. And so that became their target. It was France was out the way. They're not a threat. They finished. But they looked at Russia as a threat. This is the threat. And we see that all the way, literally, throughout the 1800s. And they even had open combat with Russia in the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, which was sort of a fiasco for the British. But, they learned some things in that war. They had some bad leaders, a lot of old guys left over from the Napoleonic Wars actually in that. And it was like, well, we got to rehabilitate our military, and that. But it did hurt. It did prevent the Russians from making inroads into the Near East, Lebanon, and the Ottoman Empire and that kind of area. So, and then they had almost another war in 1876. They threatened to attack Russia if they didn't stop picking on the poor Muslims, the Ottoman Empire, which the Russians were appalled by this. They say, you see, we wanted to have a holy alliance. All the Christian countries teamed up, but no, not you. You team up with the Muslims to fight other Christians because you're power mad. You're crazy. You're power mad. You're hungry for power. That's what they accuse the British of. You see, you're imperialists and all this, you understand. So that was a conflict that went on throughout the 1800s. And it was squabbling over Afghanistan and the Great Game and all of this, which continued until like today. But when you look at that carefully, but so they just basically had it in for Russia for nearly 100 years after, or really today. It's still going on today, so it really never stopped. They had it in for Russia since 1815, 220 years, 10 years, sorry, 210 years. But then another problem cropped up, and I talked about this in previous videos. You might recall another problem cropped up. So they're going along and with this conflict with Russia, and then there was a problem in southern Africa with the Boers, the Dutch farming countries. There were two Boer countries, Orange Free State and South African Republic and the Orange Free State, or the Transvaal South African Republic. Two Dutch countries, not owned by the Netherlands, just Dutch, in that they were ethnically Dutch, and they were, but they had two little countries down there, republics. They kept to themselves. They were like real kind of like fundamentalist Calvinists, but they didn't bother anybody. They just kind of had their own little thing going on down there. Just want to be left alone. And the British, being British, would not leave them alone, especially when they discovered that the country was full of gold and diamonds. Gold and diamonds. Oh, well. So they had a lot of conflicts down there because the British wanted their land and they didn't want to give it to them. And so they were able to provoke them into attacking them. All right. So they figured, well, these guys are farmers. They're not really too adept. They pretty should be easily defeated. I guess that's their thinking, But they were able to irritate them enough to where they did fire the first shot. Hello, Burley. Sullivan, cheers back to you. But that didn't turn out quite like they thought, because the Boer War, the Dutch got a big jump on them and were unexpectedly competent, and so it was kind of touch and go for about a year. It was kind of scary for them because they never expected this. It was kind of like, Apollo Creed fighting Rocky. They don't realize, they think it's a show. I mean, they don't know it's a show. They think it's a fight, a damn fight, So, but of course, eventually the British Empire sent in all kind of troops, and they ruthlessly counterattacked and crushed the Boer forces and got them to surrender in 1902. Of course, that continued as a low-level conflict between the Dutch Boers and the British until 1994, only 31 years ago, continued as a low-level conflict until only 31 years ago, when the Boers, well, basically surrendered and agreed to scrap their ethnic program, let's call it that, and to rejoin the British Commonwealth of Nations, which they had quit, which actually can help lead to a conflict, but or exacerbate the conflict. But they did surrender in 1994 and said, okay, give up on the ethnic program, and we're going to rejoin the Commonwealth. In the story. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is when the Boers got the jump on them and they had all this trouble around Lady Smith and Mafeking, when they kind of had the British on the ropes for a little bit, not too long, but a little bit, the German emperor sent a telegram to the Boers congratulating them on their victory. Now, England was already a little nervous about Germany after 1870, a little nervous about them because they had gotten unified as a single nation state. There had been many states. There were many states in Germany, and there was one nation, the German nation. They all spoke German. They all ate sauerkraut and drank lager beer and played music at festivals, but they ate spread lard on bread with garlic. But after 1871, they were not just a single nation, the German people. Now they became a nation state, the German Empire. And also they had Austria, a German nation, but they had their own empire down in the southeastern part of Europe, so that wasn't really a concern to them. And Austria was always weak. Believe me, England was never worried about Austria because Austria was always weak. They never won a war in their whole history. They were always terrible. Like if you had to be in a war, you'd want to fight Austria because you knew you're going to win. But Germany, they were worried about. A little bit worried because they began to industrialize very rapidly. They were already industrialized, but now it accelerated in 1871. And then they began to militarize, which was because they didn't mind when Prussia was militarized to fight France during the Napoleonic War. That was helpful. They were always allied with Prussia, in fact. But when they began to militarize and start to try to build a big navy, I don't know why they wanted to do this. This is a question, there was no need to do this. Nobody was trying to attack Germany. It's kind of paranoid country, but they were just following everybody's example. So their emperor, William II, especially when he took over in 1888, and his prime ministers, his chancellors, they wanted to militarize Germany, have a great military, a great navy, a great army, a great navy. And they want to have colonies around the world. Well, they ended up getting colonies in Africa and Asia and the Pacific Ocean. The British watching them a little bit. But when they got that telegram sent to the Boers congratulating them on their victory over England, initial victories, they got very paranoid. They said, oh, wait a minute. And they took Russia and they put them on the back burner. They just took Russia, so we can put them on the back burner. We got bigger fish to fry in it, and the fish lives in Berlin. Okay, let's see, comments. And like I said, anybody can join this if they want. They got something constructive to say, let's put it that way. You just commented. I thought about it, but it's still not ready for that yet, Hector. So that was a concern to them. Now here we go. We know what happened with the Archduke's assassination. Archduke Francis Ferdinand and his wife murdered in Sarajevo, which was actually part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire at the time. They had annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908, but they didn't want to be part of Austria. So it was all kind of rebels down there, Serbian rebels supported by Serbia, and a lot of trouble. Austria really, if Austria wanted to stay strong, they should have said, look, but nobody thinks that way. They should have said, let's get rid of this empire. It's a total drag. They should have just said, Hungary, you got your independence, which they practically had anyway in 1867. And Yugoslavia, the South Slavs, you can have your independence. We don't care what y'all do. If y'all want to fight it out, do what you want. We don't need this. I don't know what they thought they were going to gain from it, because honestly, they did not gain anything. To rule over a bunch of people that do not want to be part of your country does not make any sense. They should have done that in 1914 or 1908. Literally, let Slovenia go independent, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, or separate, one country separate, doesn't matter. Just let them go. Does not matter, because it does not in any way affect you. But no, they want to hold on to this empire, and it brought them down. Empire that doesn't do anything for you. That's the point. Doesn't do anything for you. Okay. I guess it looks nice on a map, but what does it do? Brian Carpenter cheers. Oh, well, 6-pack. Brian. Okay, now, but the opportunity presented itself, because we know the story. The Austrians blame Serbia for the murder. The Serbians say, oh, we didn't know about that. And they didn't believe them, because it's pretty obvious they did know about it. And then the Russians sticking their nose in the middle of it. And then the Germans reacting to that with total panic, telling the Russians, you need to back off. You need to back off. This is a local conflict. What is all of this about? And then France jumping in. Germany telling France, please don't jump in. This is crazy. This is insanity, And then England. Now, England had I made a video about that, about causes of World War I. They held the linchpin because France wasn't going to get into this if they didn't think England was going to help them. I told you France had become an appendage of the British Empire, a junior partner, if you want to call it that. That's a very accurate term. They're not going to fight Germany if they don't think England's going to help them. Not going to happen. But they figure they're going to help them. And Russia ain't going to fight Germany if they don't think France is going to hit Germany from the west side, from the backside. And ain't no way Serbia is fighting alone without Russia's help, because they're going to get beat like a drum. They're a tiny country in Southeast Europe, and they got no chance, even against Austria, who can't win for losing. But they could beat a little country like that. That's not an issue. But so that's what the Germans are telling England. You are the linchpin. You are the linchpin. All you have to do is come out publicly and say you're not getting involved. You're going to stay neutral, and the whole thing's going to fall apart, and they won't have a war. Well, it might be a little two-week war between Austria and Serbia, which doesn't concern anybody. Who cares who wins that? I mean, big deal. So, the man was murdered along with his wife. And if your king or your king's heir and his wife had been murdered, we know what you would be doing. So don't even act like you would make those people pay. You know what would happen. We wouldn't even be talking about it right now. You'd have already invaded them. Austria was being generous because they've been waiting around for a month. You wouldn't have waited around 2 days. But of course, they wouldn't give them they're not going to give you the chance. They want you. This is what my whole theory is about debate and setting people up. You've been looking at Germany for 30, 40 years. You don't trust them. You don't like them. You feel they are a threat. They are a rival. They are going to rival you. Their technological growth is extraordinary. You don't want to wait till they get some weapon that nobody can deal with. So if you're going to fight them when they got to fight a lot of people. You know, in other words, the point of the video is I think they set people up so they can fight them to their advantage at their, when it's according to their scenario, then it will work to their, like I said, it would work to their advantage. Because they knew Germany's in a pickle, you know. And the British say, no. We just have to see what happens. We'll just have to look at it. You know, that's what they kept stalling them. You know, they knew they were stalling them. And the Germans kept saying, we know you're stalling us because you want to wait till we have no chance of winning and we'll just be overwhelmed by Russia and France and then our country is destroyed. We're not stupid, you know. But, you know, we can't wait. And they're telling the English this, the British, we can't wait. We have to act now because we have plans in the fact that if this kind of emergency ever occurs, we could possibly win, but that's even questionable. We're not waiting around to be destroyed because you stalling us. So Germany declared war on Russia, and then they declared war on France, and then the ball got rolling. But you see now the British could frame it, and that's been framed ever since 111 years. What has been the story? Germany attacked everybody, and we had World War I, the World War. But that's what they wanted to happen. They knew they were in a trap. They can't get out of it. And plus, the British have an ace card to play. They got the trump card. The trump card is America, the United States. They knew Woodrow Wilson was in tight with the British establishment. He was pro-British. And look what he did. He worked day and night to get the United States involved. And that worked. Took a few years. Didn't matter because the United States jumped in and tipped the balance. And then Germany was wiped. Beat, but not destroyed, though. That's another story. But they were beaten. And that worked. That, in a way, was double for Great Britain because Russia was so decimated by the First World War. They were pretty much out of contention for 20 years. You know, they were just, I mean, they talk a bunch of talk about we're going to take over the capitalist countries. We're going to do this. We're going to do all kind of stuff. But they couldn't do anything because they couldn't really hardly run their own country. So if you're trying to run the world, that's a perfect example because they bring down Germany and then Russia's crippled and can't do too much. Of course, they rebuilt, you know, they become a threat again in the 1930s, and the British looked at it that way. They said, okay, this is a problem that we will have to deal with, but we'll deal with it some sort of way. Okay, well, Preston, I'm sorry you're drinking too much. It's not really the focus of the video at this time. Hope you do better and control this problem. It's a problem that can be controlled, but some people have more difficulty with it than others. All right, I'm going to go get some water, and then I'm going to keep talking about the bait. But we know that after the war, Germany had a lot of internal problems, to say the least. You're welcome, Preston. Many internal problems, and but their government, the government of Germany, the new republic, German Republic, they, because they're the president now, no longer an emperor, but they say, you know, this was their policy. We're not taking this. We're not taking this line down. We're going to pay these people back. We're not losing our territories around the world. We're not going to have our country cut into two pieces. You know, we're not going to follow this stupid treaty that says we caused the whole war. We're not accepting it. So they began a rearmament policy, secret, but the British probably knew what they were up to. They continued advanced weapons. They actually enhanced. They accelerated their advanced weapons program. British probably knew about that. But they put on a smiley face. So yeah, we're going to go to the Olympics. We're going to compete in the Olympics. Be a big happy family. Be in the League of Nations. Everybody will be cool. One big happy family. Of course, the British were not buying that. They knew what was up. But then when Hitler came to power in 1933, they were more open, well, obviously open about it. They weren't going to just put on a happy face and be, la-di-da, but secretly work on weapons, which was obviously a bad mistake for Hitler, because you've already got people looking to take you down, and they definitely were trying to take him down because they see this guy's a serious threat. They already know Germany's a threat. That's without him. If he doesn't exist, they're a threat. But now they're a much worse threat because he's openly renouncing the Treaty of Versailles. He's openly rearming the country, Air Force, Navy, Army, openly demanding to get their territories back, openly doing all these things. And they say, okay, we are taking this country down. But nobody wants a war. You got to remember this. Everybody was disgusted after World War I. The First World War killed so many people, 10 million people or more. So nobody could be in office saying, I want to start a second World War. Your political career would end immediately. Okay, you got to remember this. Over. So, the British say, we got to take this guy down. But you look at it, they say, how they approached it. We got to take him down, but we got to do it at our convenience, not his convenience. So time was actually on Hitler's side. If you look at that situation, time was on Hitler's side. He needed to delay. Well, he needed to not go to war, honestly, because nothing good comes from that. But, in his mind, they're going to get their stuff back, and that's more like fantasy than reality. But definitely, if that's your project, time is on your side. So you need to delay a war as long as possible because you have an advanced weapons program, but it's not that advanced. You're building up your military, but you got a long way to go. You're building up your Navy, got a long way to go. You're building up your Air Force, got a long way to go. So you're just starting out. Definitely would not want to get into a war this soon. In the British mindset, they would want it to start sooner than later, before all the advances are made. Before the technology is too advanced. You don't want it going into the 1950s or 60s or, by golly, the 70s. That would be a worst case, but by that time they would have nuclear missiles and everything else. Then you can't, then it's a real problem. So you got to look at the attitude of the British. They got to take Germany out and got to take them out soon, before they're advanced. And here's the right guy to do it because he's the perfect person to bait. Now, you look at the British, they're very good at psychological profile. Even if you look at the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, that talks about that. Remember the man tells the computer, remember that movie was about artificial intelligence, AI, and he tells the AI computer, he says, you're working up our crew psychological profile. And the computer is like, yeah, you got me. Like, that's what I'm doing. What he says he's doing, at least. But anyway, they were very good at evaluating their opponent's psychological profile. So they knew Hitler was a hothead. He would act before he would think many times. He didn't. You're right. I did like 2010. Something wonderful is going to something's going to happen? Something wonderful, right? That's what he said, something wonderful. Hello, someday you should do a room tour and show us all your bottles. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I think people would find that video boring. I would find it boring myself. Yep, IBM. But that movie was about artificial intelligence and how it didn't work. It was an early. Remember the whole movie was an early AI program application, but they didn't do it right, and they made it break. They didn't do it. They didn't make it break on purpose. They broke it. They made it malfunction. Is what happened, and they made it. They caused it to malfunction. But that's another. We're not talking about the movie. But anyway, so the British. That's what I'm saying. They had a good psychological profile of Hitler. Hothead, don't think straight, or doesn't think things out. Doesn't really plan that well. That's the kind of person you can maneuver into firing the first shot. Then you could say, well, they started it. We tried to have peace. We wanted peace, but so, it was very clever because they get together with France. And, they're so dangerous. Tried to talk the Soviet Union into it, but remember, they didn't like Russia to start with. And and Stalin's demands were so outrageous. Oh yeah, I'll join your alliance. Just give me half of Finland, big chunk of Finland, a big chunk of Romania, a big chunk of Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all three of those countries, and all this other area. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's like, this is why the man is on our hit list. He's as bad as the one we're trying to take out right now. So that didn't work out. And then we know the whole scenario. Hitler agreed to the Soviet-German non-aggression pact, which was sort of like a trap that Stalin set, so that he could maneuver Hitler into go into war with Great Britain and France, and then he could sit back and watch them wipe each other out and laugh all the way to the bank, But they were looking for bait. We need some good bait. And it looked like Czechoslovakia would be very good because Germany had some pretty legitimate claims on Czech lands, the Sudeten land, they called it, where they had ethnic Germans. And they said, okay, we want to annex that. This big crisis going on. And the British say, oh, no, we have an alliance with the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, and we have to defend them. And so their thinking was, if they invade, then we can fight Germany, and then Russia will come in from the east, and France, and we'll take them down. And they're not too advanced yet. Germany's only been on this Hitler program for 5 years, so we have a good chance of taking him out. But then supposedly, I've read this, that the British High Command, they thought they weren't quite ready. So they were telling Neville Chamberlain, we really could use another year, honestly. If we got another year, we're going to take this guy out. But right now, it's a little iffy, but it could do it. We could do it, but if we could buy time, that would be excellent. So people say appeasement, they appeased Germany. They gave them land for peace, but that's not really true. It looks like they were stalling for time. Hitler thought of it that way, but he, like I say, he was goofy, so he did that thing in March 1939 when he invaded the rest of the Czech Republic and made it a German protectorate, which they were trying to recreate the boundaries back to 1866, what they were trying to do. But they never trusted him anyway. I mean, let's not pretend that they made a peace agreement in 1938 and they thought, oh, he's all right, we could trust him. No, the whole goal was to take the guy out one way or other, because they see Germany, and to take the country out, let's look at it that way. Not him personally, although they didn't like him, but Germany in general. We want to bring them to a point where they're never a threat again, like we did with France. We won't cripple them, and bring them under our effective control, if you want to look at it that way. So, okay, Joe, watch it when you get a chance, if you could tolerate it. So, no, it's not a wine review. So we know the bait was Poland. Perfect situation for England because they knew that Germany and Poland had some border disputes, had been ongoing, and that part of the problem with Versailles, it gave the city of Danzig and the surrounding land to Poland, well, to the League of Nations under Polish administration. That was almost like a guarantee for war. You know, it's just the people that lived in Danzig did not want to be under Polish control. They didn't have any interest in being part of Poland. They wanted to be part of Germany. They were German people. So, yes, that's right. So, they signed the non-aggression pact with Stalin in 1939, August 23rd, 1939. And then the British knew, now we got them. We got them because we're just going to tell Poland not to give in. We're allies with them, not that they could really help Poland. That's the thing about alliances. Alliances are a bum rap because they're not going to really help you. These countries don't get in alliances with you because they like you. They get in alliances with you to use you, okay? And if things go wrong, they're not going to help you. They're just using you. So, but like they use Poland. So now that's their wedge. That's their wedge issue. So Poland, Germany says, well, we want this little land adjustment. They really didn't demand too much from them, honestly. And then the British are telling Poland, don't do it. Tell them, no, no, no. Don't give them an inch. We got your back. We got your back. We're allies. The British Empire is going to back you up. Now the Polish, I like Polish food. I like Polish people. One of the popes was from Poland. I like Poland. Let me tell you this. I like Poland. But they should have never listened to that. They should have immediately got out of that alliance and made the deal because they had nothing to gain from this alliance. They got Russia to the east trying to grab their land, which should have belonged to white Russia anyway. It really wasn't Polish people living there. That's a problem. And by the way, Belarus never did give that land back up until right now. You got Germany breathing down your neck on the north and the west because they want land that you honestly took from them. And you remember Austria, Russia, and Germany had taken over Poland in the 1790s, and it wasn't even a country anymore for a long time. So they're surrounded by people that are a threat to them, and that can literally hurt them right now with troops on the ground. And you listening to England over there eating hot cross buns and drinking Harvey's Bristol cream sherry and eating what they eat, black pudding and these ham rolls. And they're telling you not to give in to the people that's got a gun to your head and can come in and shoot at you right now. But they're telling them, no, trust us. We got your back. So Poland, this is my theory, Poland foolishly listened to them and said, we're not giving you anything, you know. And it worked out perfect because they were able to incite Hitler, I told you the psychological profile. The British knew he was excitable. He would take everything personally, and he was reactive, so they could make him react, just like Germany in 1914. So this is what my theory. They were able to maneuver him into war, and they had him right where they wanted him. And then, of course, all the people in England and Canada, Scotland, England, Canada, Northern Ireland, Wales, Australia, New Zealand. Oh, look at he attacked Poland. He started it. You know, they're not going to be as enthusiastic if they thinking, oh, look, our government maneuvered this guy into firing the first shot. That's not going to really inspire you. They had him where they wanted him. He walked right into the trap, and it's like a mousetrap. We got you, you fool. And Hitler got into a trap, and he couldn't get out of it. We know the rest of the story. We all, of course, know the rest of the story. They baited him. He took the bait. And the Kaiser took the bait. 1914, he should have never done that. As bad as it was, he should have known they were trying to take his country down, which they did. Hitler didn't have enough good sense to realize he was being set up. He realized it later, but it was far too late. And so Stalin was sitting back, ha ha, and Chamberlain, but then of course he got sick and he resigned, and then Churchill took over. It was even much more ruthless. And then, but we could look at other instances like Korea. There's some question if the U.S. baited North Korea into attacking. With Dean Acheson making the speech earlier in 1950, saying in the speech that Korea was not within the U.S. defensive perimeter, which they obviously were. But some people think that he planted that in the speech as an oblique reference that he knew. In other words, he put it in the speech because he knew that China, Communist China, and the Soviet Union and North Korea would read, and they took it as the U.S. were not going to defend South Korea. I don't know why Kim Il-sung would have believed that, but maybe he wasn't that bright, and he definitely walked into a trap, and he was easily defeated by the U.S. United Nations forces. We know the United Nations pretty easily defeated North Korea. The only reason that it turned into a stalemate is because Communist China jumped in. So it was really a war between the United States and China, with Korea becoming a sideshow, just that they were fighting in Korea. And then Vietnam, there's pretty good evidence that the U.S. baited North Vietnam into firing those shots. You know, and then we had Johnson making a big thing of, oh, they attacked our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. They're making it into like a Pearl Harbor thing. And April Glaspie making that discussion, 1990, saying that the U.S. doesn't get involved in intra-Arab problems. And a lot of people believe that she said that. She claims she didn't. She said, oh, no, I didn't mean that. But other people think she said it purposely to bait Saddam Hussein into attacking Kuwait. I don't know if she did or not. It certainly worked. If it wasn't intentional, that's what happened, because he thought he had a green light. I don't know why he would think that. I don't know why he thought he could beat the United States, Great Britain, France, and a bunch of other tag-along countries in a war, because there was no possibility of that happening. That was like the most sure-shot war in the history of wars. He had basically 0% chance of winning. You know, you understand? 0% chance of winning, or a 0% chance of surviving, as it turns out. Was the Gulf of Tonkin beat for the U.S.? What do you think? To get more involved, yeah, much more heavily involved. The U.S. had been involved in Vietnam since the 1950s, but this was a way to get the combat troops involved, not just advisors and support personnel. You know, talking about Pearl Harbor, that's another example of baiting someone into attacking, because, you know, we know what the current, or the common, let's say the common interpretation of it, you know, that what you see on the news, what you see on television, or at the World War II Museum in New Orleans, which is so ridiculous. I've been to that museum twice. It's terrible. You know, it's a terrible, terrible thing to visit. Anyway, but I think it's Louisiana's #1 tourist attraction. But the history is so warped over there. It's so manipulated. They never present anything. They never present two sides. It's all just standardized There's no thinking involved. You don't have to think. I think that's why some people like it. You don't have to think. You just look at stuff, get all emotional. You don't have to think. If you go in there and you start thinking, they might ask you to leave. But anyway, Pearl Harbor, that's kind of been a controversy since December 7th. Some people were saying that day. They were saying that before it happened, that Roosevelt was trying to bait Japan into attacking. And this is what anti-war people were saying in 1941. They were saying that then. You're just trying to make them attack. You just want Japan to attack. You tried to get Germany to do it, but they wouldn't take the bait. Now, Hitler wouldn't take the bait there. He was already in a fix. He was going to fight the United States. He couldn't beat Russia and Great Britain. So he knew he was basically screwed. But he was definitely trying to avoid a U.S. war, because that would be a guarantee. You're already losing. Your chances of winning are basically terrible. Low percentage chance of a good outcome. And now you're going to fight the United States, which would make it a 100% chance you're not going to win. Guaranteed loss. But Japan was a country similar to him in a way, because they profiled them and they knew they were hot-headed. They had this sense of honor where you could like insult their honor and they could attack. They would attack you, And they didn't have good sense about like outcomes, like, well, they're like Hitler. They never could see the big picture. You can't. The British are interesting because they always look at the big picture. They are thinking they're usually thinking like 100 years ahead. And you're thinking like for right now, so they're dealing with people like Hitler and Japan, their leaders. They think in the moment, they think, oh, this is happening. Let's react. But they're thinking, the British Empire and their American understudy, they look at the big picture, you see, whereas Hitler and people like that, they're always looking at they don't see the big picture. They're only looking at events, and they would never attach the events one to another and see how it's working out. You see, they can't see that. Don't know why. Maybe they're not that smart. Maybe you don't have to be that smart to be a ruler. But, here's Japan. The United States is obviously trying to bait you into a war, right? You've been fighting China since 1937 and you can't win. And there's no reasonable prospect that you're going to win. Let's think about that. You're fighting China, a pretty weak country in 1937, 38, 39, 40, 41. But you can't beat them. You brag, you talk about your great Japanese superiority and the good for nothing Chinese and so forth, but you can't win. What makes you think? What in your wildest dreams would make you think that you're going to somehow beat the United States and Great Britain, or even make them come to a treaty agreement, a settlement? No smart person would think that. You would never do that. You would never attack. You don't see you're being set up, but no, they don't see it. And so, of course, the Japanese, here's the trap. They walk into it, and we know the outcome, total destruction. And that's why I say, that's the whole thing about this video. These countries that looking to run the show, they say, oh, you are a threat. If they see, now look at Russia. Russia's still a threat. Like I say, since 1815. They've been having Russia on the hit list since 1815. Not 2015, not 1915. No, my friends, 1815. Crimea and Ukraine, perfect trap. I tell people at work, I said, Putin walked into the trap. They wanted him to invade. Ukraine was the bait. Now, United States and England say, oh, we care so much about Ukraine. Oh, those poor people. It's terrible. Oh yeah, okay. Like you cared about Poland, like the British cared about Poland. They got invaded, did nothing to help them, did like literally nothing to help them. That's why you cared about them, because you didn't help them at all. That's evidence that you cared about them. No, obviously they were the tool. Now here's Ukraine. They are the tool. I think the United States and Great Britain, England, UK, they wanted Russia to invade Ukraine because they wanted to see what are their capabilities, what is their proficiency, Air Force, Army, Navy, what is their military proficiency. I think they believed that it wasn't that good, but they wanted to see. Ukraine's expendable, they don't care. And there's a double benefit to the US American axis, which is they can bring Russia into a long, drawn out stalemate where they cannot win, and they expend all kind of money, all kind of people killed. Not to mention that U.S. and the British can study all the weapon systems and their capabilities and all of this. So I don't think there's any intention that the war is going to end anytime soon. They got them where they want them. Like I told you, I've been saying this throughout the whole video. They've got them where they want them. They had them where they wanted them in 1914. They had them where they wanted them in 1939 and 41, 50, 64. And they had them where they wanted them in 2022. He walked into it. And I know Putin's probably thinking, what a mistake. They baited me, and I took the bait. What a dummy. But it's too late now. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe he could just stop. But that's probably not on the table. Oh, I was drinking Imperial Stout. What's on top? It's all gone now. Hitler declared war on America immediately after Japanese. Yeah, that's right. Immediately after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Hitler declared war on the United States. Very stupid. A very foolish move. No one can figure that out. Even the people in Germany couldn't figure it out, because you have nothing to gain from that. Yes, it's true the United States had been trying to bait him into going to war since 1941 or 40, but definitely all throughout 41. Yes, it's true that he was an ally with Japan, but he cannot help Japan. They're on the other side of the world. Japan cannot help Germany, except maybe provide a distraction of some sort. But I realized that the United States and Germany had been in an undeclared war for about a year before December 8, 1941. What do you gain from it? So he did him a favor. So he did Roosevelt a favor. He went around screaming and hollering Roosevelt, that lying Freemason and all of this. Okay, fine. You can call him names, but you play in his game. You're saying you're being railroaded, and U.S. is setting us up and everything, but you're allowing yourself to be set up. That was what the Germans always were saying. The British are an evil empire. They try to set people up, and they're like an octopus with legs all over the world and so forth. But yeah, but you're giving them what they want. It's crazy. But like I said, they never could see they getting set up. Hitler never, he did later, I guess, realize, but they don't see it at the time you're being set up. It's a trap. Japan, it's a trap. That's what they want you to do. They want you to attack. They're going to bring you down. They're going to wipe you out. Well, of course, that's what they did. Japan's best option was to definitely never attack the United States and Great Britain, and definitely get out of the war with China, because pride leads to a fall, and they were very prideful, and it led to their downfall. They had nothing to gain from fighting China, and they definitely double times infinity had nothing to gain from fighting the British Empire and the United States. All right, Germany had nothing to gain from getting into World War II, but they did it anyway. The British had a lot to gain because they wanted to bring down Germany, which is what they did. And the British have a lot to gain from Ukraine because they want to bring down Putin, which is what they're doing. It's being very, it's not helping Russia. Russia's not accomplishing anything over there. Okay, let's look at some comments. Liquor enthusiast says America has been propping up Europe and pretty much the rest of the planet ever since. That's right. Stone IPA, well, that's good. I like West Mall. Oh yeah, of course. Churchill wanted the U.S. involved. That was their trump card. Like I said, they used that card in World War I, and they played that same card again in the Second World War. And I don't know why Germany couldn't see that they're going to come in. Yes, that's exactly the reason they invaded. Or, I'm sorry, they launched their special operation. They claim it's not a war, it's a special operation. But that was the whole thing. They wanted them to, this is my theory, they wanted them to do this. Ukraine was the trap. They set the bait, and Putin, I can't believe he walked into that. I don't know I can't believe he fell for that. I just can't believe it. I thought he was smarter than that. I used to think Putin was really smart, but now maybe he's not that smart. Because they had him where they wanted him, and he walked right into it. But that's on him, Now he's got to pay the price. He's got to pay the piper, right? Okay, so you just look at all these traps that they set, and the adversary walks into it every time. It's like, you can't see that, like Saddam Hussein. You can't see this. Saddam Hussein's. I have a master's degree from the University of Cairo. But he was educated. I'm not denying that. But he definitely could not see the big picture. If there was ever a person who could not see the big picture, it was Saddam Hussein, right? But I mean, we can name so many others. Putin, Saddam Hussein, Hirohito and Tojo in Japan, Hitler and Kaiser William II. They just don't see it. They don't see what's coming. They don't see what's coming at them. They don't see. It's right in front of them, and they don't see it, You say, well, it's easy for you to say because you're sitting back examining all of it. It's true. I am, like hindsight, they say, but I am looking at back. But if you see a pattern, right? This pattern didn't start the other day. This pattern goes back for the longest time. I brought up 1861 at the beginning of the video. That's not the other day. But people keep falling into the same trap. And it's always set by the same people. And that's a pattern. The same guys set the same trap, and you walk into it. Now, I think that's the main thing right now. I mean, the U.S. got Russia on the hit list. That's their main. United States and Great Britain, that's their main project. It's been their main project for 210 years. Take down Russia. They took down Germany, brought them under their wing as an appendage of the British American. I got to say England first, British American Axis, because the British constructed this whole thing. They're the ones who came up with it. They're the ones who devised the Monroe Doctrine. They devised the open door policy, not the United States. The United States put it under their brand, but the British came up with those ideas. And so what can I say about it? I don't know what the future is. I know what happened, So let's see. So here's a message to you world leaders. Don't fall into the trap. Don't take the bait. Taiwan is bait. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. Don't take that Taiwan bait. But I'm not even going to go there. Okay. Right. At least we're not speaking German, but that wouldn't be so bad. German is a nice language, and they have good food. You know, it's pretty good sausage and all that stuff. Bread. I don't mind it. I'm trying to figure Trump out with that. Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out. I don't know. I think I'm starting to think that the whole Iran was a pantomime. I don't know. I don't speak German, Burley, so I don't know what you're talking about. Um, yeah, so I was talking about the beginning of the video. That was the beginning of the video. That was the whole starting part. They baited them into attacking because they wanted to have a war and make it look like they started. It worked out perfect for them. I mean, you know, lost 600,000 people, but you know, a person like Lincoln probably would have thought that's an acceptable loss. Ruthless people like that, they don't think like we think, you know. Especially if they're not the ones getting killed. We have conscience, you know. We have a conscience. Like, man, that's terrible. These people got killed. It's so bad. But they're thinking like, well, the goal was achieved. They think more like a psychopath. We think more like a regular person, you know, not a psychopath. Okay, Trump is different now. He's different. I think maybe the whole Iran thing was a pantomime. He claims that Iran forewarned him when they attacked the Doha base. Maybe he forewarned them before he launched his raid on Iran. In other words, this is me thinking, it may have been a pantomime to satisfy the crowd in Tel Aviv. I don't know, because you know now, we got to remember now, Trump uses Jedi mind tricks. And even I don't understand all these Jedi mind tricks. He stays many steps ahead. He plays that, you know, that silly man act. You know, he plays that act, you know. So that throws people off. You know, he plays all that, you know, buffoonery act. That's done obviously to make people think they're dealing with a fool, you know. So he's smart about that. Joe Biden, that was no act, you know. That was what you had, what you saw was what you got. But Trump, you know, he's been doing this for 20 years now. This act, and I don't know if the British really fall for it. They probably don't fall for it, and the Canadians probably know, yeah, it's an act, you know, the goofy man act. But it could have been coordinated. The whole thing could have been coordinated between Trump and the Iranians. Let's just do this little show to placate these people who I have a big problem with. And I got to work through the media. I got to work through them. And you know what I'm talking about? And they might have said, yeah. So I don't know this, but that would have been the kind of Trump thing to do. And then he can be bombastic, you know, and say, we destroyed everything. You know, it was a great victory. And the Iranians can say, we'll fix you up. We'll show you. And then all of a sudden it's worked out. Like I said, it might have been worked out previously. Oh, thank you, Claude. So that's basically the video. Just thought I'd throw that out there because I'm thinking about these things all the time. Always thinking about these things, how people get set up and baited. And it's like an ongoing thing. You know, we're not at the end of the story. We just in the story. We're not at the end of the story. We're in the story. All right. Well, y'all take care now. Bye-bye, everybody. And be interested to read your comments. That's what they say on TV. You got to think. Think. People don't think. They go to the World War II Museum. They don't think. Okay. Bye-bye. Yep. That's what they say on TV.